The dopamine effect is a pun that I kind of came up with several days ago, let's say. And I was thinking about video games and movies nowadays, and compared to most of the video games that were done back in the times when I was young, well, I also had a different sense of perception regarding those games and movies, but it just feels that everything nowadays is becoming more and more dope. Like when you take into account modern games, everything regarding them tends a bit, at least a bit, towards a money milking facility for big companies, since I doubt big companies actually care about their clients, the gamers, or well, people who enjoy their games. Just because you play a game, it's not necessarily that you're a gamer, but it's all right. People have their own sense of entitlement. So the point about video games is that, well, when it comes to video game, there are a few core aspects. And usually the best one, the best hook is the story. Since obviously, if you have a poor story, well, people are kind of gonna, well, ignore it more or less. You know, you need to learn about the hooks of a game, right? The game must always have emotional hooks. Now, people, depending on their level of awareness, but usually this society is full, unfortunately, of ignorant people. Well, thousands of layers does ignorance have, but well, people feel that by pressing a few buttons, they are achieving something in life. And they are turning their own life in a meme, though. Obviously, I don't find it bad to have fun in video games. I've presented this as two completely different lives, but oh well, that's one of the points. So, when it comes to experiencing life, life is about expressing yourself outside, expressing yourself in front of other people, and being the clown like I usually do. Although many people rarely believe this because they kind of see more of a mechanized part of me, but oh well, each important side of me has, well, its importance, each less important side also has its function. When it comes to video games, people believe that by pressing a few buttons and crying when their beloved character dies, they simply have experienced something in life. Now, if you are to take into account how games are structured, depression is usually that which sells the most. Because many people are already frustrated and depressed, and well, if you make characters that they'll easily like, and whatever character you make, it doesn't matter how dumb you think they are in terms of design, there will always be a few people at least who will like that, and that's good because there's at least some sense of differentiation when it comes to people and their passions, right? There's always going to be an audience for almost any type of game and any type of movie. Like there's people who actually watch bad replicas of bigger movies. Now, I've always said watching movies is a big distraction, and obviously the mass media nowadays is a big distraction. The news doesn't tell you anything that should make you feel better. It's usually depression, death, hatred, separation, and all these aspects. When you play video games, it's kind of the same thing. See, because many people get overly identified with something, this is a result of ignorance. Because when you're in ignorance towards yourself, right, you don't know your potential, you don't know your limits, your boundaries. The problem is people lack boundaries nowadays. When one lacks boundaries, their existence is barely physical in terms of mental, psychological, and the such. Now, I'm not saying physical in the sense of, touchable as we know it, because the mind and the emotional body, right, these two bodies are also physical. It's just that they are less perceptive, right? But when you overthink, your head actually hurts because you're technically tormenting your mental body. So if it hurts, it exists, and well, it definitely has a physical aspect. Because if it weren't physical, it wouldn't hurt, right? When you say my soul hurts, well, that part which shall leave this physical body when it becomes the least compatible with life possible, and well, technically you die, and any one of us will experience that sooner or later. The point is, when that happens, right, that part will leave, right? It is beyond physicality. It experiences physicality for a while, and then it simply leaves. You can't say basically your soul hurts. It's technically your emotions, right? The emotional body reacts in a very powerful way, which can actually feel as, let's say, painful. So emotions are that which guide us the most. Ultimately, when one is on their deathbed, their emotions and the attachments, right, that their emotions were made towards, right, events in their life that emotions were attached to, depending on the power of those emotions, most likely those events you will simply remember, right? Usually traumatic events or very, let's say, um, positive events in your life, one may say. These are usually the more prone one is to remember. The less one experiences in life, right, the more ignorant they are towards life, towards sensitivity of life, towards the ones around them, believing that life is all about this physical body and its survival. That is no measure of living life. And there was a quote that said, the unexamined life is not worth living. Because if someone doesn't examine their own life, they will only live in the impression that whatever this physical body experiences, that's all that can be, right? That's all that this life, as we call it, can actually give. So video games are built in such a way that they always give you the dopamine rush, as I call them. Because, see, wasting time with video games and movies, usually these two don't help you much towards your spiritual development or towards anything that's, introspection related. Because introspection is that which allows you to understand more and more about how you specifically function, based on patterns and things regarding the intelligence of this physical body. Intelligence which applies to all of us humans, and obviously to all animals depending on their own race. So the more one gets to know about the physicality of their body, how their functions, how their system works, it's easier and easier for you to identify problems into others. Obviously, one shouldn't end up using those against the people, or, well, they shouldn't end up on the other side as overly helping people, because people can easily build up expectations, and we know expectations are always the antechamber of disappointment, as I call them. And when people get disappointed, there's always a sensation that vengeance needs to be done. Now, video games, usually, especially MMOs, tend to cover a large, broad number of stereotypes when it comes to characters, so that they have more and more hooks, right? And there's also, minority-based characters, or whatever humans nowadays call as a minority, the modern minorities, right? Or different other, things. Um, so that people get more and more hooked, so that you know they can actually enjoy the game. Now, enjoying the game means you're pressing a few buttons, you're watching a few images, you're hearing a few sounds, and, well, you have this dopamine rush, and it feels very good. You're finally experiencing something different other than the decadence, depression, and whatever this sick society is putting in all of us, starting with school, starting from abusive parents, work colleagues, whatever. So, as things develop in one's life, if depressions are the only thing that are a core of one's existence, well, unfortunately, they'll seek distractions. This world excels at distractions because, obviously, it's the only thing it can do. Keeping people distracted means keeping people disempowered. When disempowerment occurs, people cause even more pains against them, and obviously on others. Because when you are disempowered, you feel useless. When you feel useless, you'll always want to make the good thing, right? When you want to make the good thing, that's the biggest problem, because you want to do it, right? You want an emotional feedback upon having done something good. And that's why most good intentions end up as, uh, bad deeds. They usually do more harm than the others, because that's how fanatics also work, right? And say when a fanatic joins a certain idea, They unfortunately fall victim to the mind and the first impulse of the mind. The first impulse of the mind is to kill anything it doesn't like, to exterminate it or whatever. That's how usually fanaticism is supported by the mind. You think something, you get attached to it. Everyone who thinks differently, they are the enemy. When you create this thing and people think that everyone else is the enemy, that is technically a war. It can be a social war, it can be an emotional warfare, whatever. It's a war. You always need at least two sides for a war to occur. The same thing happens in video games, and people, they get so attached to a bunch of pixels, and they start useless wars on Reddit, subreddits, or whatever, just because someone said something they didn't like about a certain character. So getting yourself intoxicated with video games ain't necessarily the best thing, because many people react emotionally. They won't know exactly how to feel towards things. They don't know what to do about those things. See, when someone plays a video game, they're just pressing a few buttons, logically reacting to certain situations, right? You can consciously act towards those situations, and when you consciously act to those, you're harder to get triggered by certain things. Balance usually isn't something that exists in most video games, and obviously the designers don't care about that, because, well, if the game sells money, it's gonna sell money through depression, right? Through people's passion to abuse themselves, because you're playing a cancer game, and you're always lying yourself that the next game will be much better, right? And you're doing this 10 times a day most likely, or at least like that, and the next day you're gonna have a better day, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a lot of pain that people cause to themselves because they love being abused. So video games are a very easy way of doing that, because people end up feeling that if they defuse a bomb in Cancer Strike, if they do literally any small action in the game, they actually have a small sense of achievement, which gives them a sense of emotional achievement. And once that triggers, well, it's a bit dangerous, because they're gonna become dependent upon that, right? They will seek that as a stability pillar in their life. That's why one of the reasons why people find it hard to simply quit a certain game, even if it is cancerous. There's no such thing as balance in it, because ultimately the more you add in a game, there's harder and harder situations that you can balance. Let's not forget what I call, as a game designer, the dead end mechanics, or literally mechanics that were implemented directly or indirectly, but which usually tend to be cancerous, and they cannot be changed without a great system overhaul. So that's also a point. Now, for example, such a dead-end mechanic would be camping in most games, like shooter games and the such. Frustrating as it is, there's always gonna be the such. Now, in games like, tank-based games, usually camping can be a good strategy. I'm not gonna dive into game strategies and the such, but a lot of such mechanics tend to be cancerous, and, people don't like it. But even if they don't like it, they still so-called enjoy the game. Life's also a game. I think it's much more worth to experience it and play it. But living in each of the two worlds and becoming the best of both worlds is always difficult, because video games take a lot of time, and obviously there's a lot of things to experience. What I want to remind people is that video games are nothing else than a tool. Use them as a tool to simply further develop a knowledge and understanding about you, right? Use the stories in those games as an inspiration. Use those stories to see, and the events in games, to see what triggers you, and try to find out why you are triggered, why you are getting angry. Well, most people get angry in games because they have stupid expectations, like always beating each and every opponent, always having an easy game, always surviving, or whatever that may be. But there's always a stupid little expectation that people build, or the fact that they will actually feel well after having played a few games, right? Many people say, let me relax a bit in a game, but games nowadays, they're not made to relax you, like some of the older games were, right? And nowadays, the AI of so many of the games is like, it's literally dumb. There's literally just brain dead things moving away. Not that AI is anything different than that, but there's no complexity added to it. It's just Nothing procedural, nothing developing or unfolding in multiple ways. It's just the same old thing. You just learn it, and well, voila, you know you're an expert at the game. You can kill some things which were anyways meant to be killed, right? It's what wisdom would call, the horse rider syndrome, right? Many people, they do things which are very simple but have a sense of accomplishment and entitlement, and they feel that, they are some kind of kings and gods and whatever on this planet. See, there was a word of wisdom that says, now you have climbed on an animal which is much more primitive than you, and you think you're some kind of god just because you view the world from a bit higher, right? And well, at least try to feel good if you actually kneel an animal who's much smarter than you and you can actually get to ride it, right? Because if the animal that you're riding is smarter than you, well, that's a problem. And because, actually, it's not much of a problem, but uh, I mean, if you're riding a horse and your awareness is lower than that horse's awareness, well, that's kind of a problem for you. The horse does the best it knows, like all other animals, including us. But if there is an animal in this world that suddenly becomes wiser or, more aware than humans and our entire potential, and you manage to kneel it, well, that's a big achievement. That's the same thing with games. People get a bit of dopamine and, that's the point. That's it. They have experienced life. It's a very superficial way of experiencing life. And, there's always the further distractions regarding a game, like what they call memes. A meme is technically a virus, a psychological virus that I was thinking about, 15 years ago. And I was thinking about such viruses that infiltrate the mind and change one's behavior, and they are very hard to pinpoint. And well, apparently what I was speaking about, I wasn't actually speaking about in vain. It's just calling them mental viruses, psychological viruses, felt a bit too much for most people, and they were looking at me as if I was some kind of alien. Well, I was also called alien because to most people I've always looked as if I'm from another world, but alien also is a painful word because it means unwanted as well. So, I'm not saying playing video games is bad, but it's not the most optimal way of experiencing life, especially if you get too easily attached to outcomes. And see, everything in this life is a vessel, everything in this life is a tool to be used. Every tool has its own vibration. Everything that is physical has its own vibration. And that reverberation, that vibration, has an influence upon us. See, if you take a glass, right? If it is empty, it has its own reverberation. If it is filled with water, it has a different reverberation, vibration, whatever you want to call it. If you fill it with piss, it's gonna have a different vibration. If you fill it with whatever you want, for each substance is gonna have its own vibration. Now the point is, after you do that, well, each of those vibrations has an influence around itself, right? It definitely impacts things around you. If people allow objects around them to influence them, well, that says a lot about your own awareness. The point is, human intellect should be ruling objects, not allow objects to rule them. Unfortunately, many people function the other way. They allow objects to simply rule them, which is technically not the best way, because if you let things rule you, they don't have any awareness, they don't have any consciousness. It's just a single vibration. If one allows that to rule them, well, unfortunately, that's so much for experiencing life, I guess. So all this being said, hopefully this video was introspective enough. You are appreciated. Take care. All the good things. Have an awesome day. Ferenc Board signing out.